Hi, I'm Norah O'Donnell, and this is Person to Person. Our guest today, Brené Brown.
Brown has spent decades studying feelings like courage and shame. She's the author of 6 #1 New York Times bestselling books. Her latest is called Atlas of the Heart. Brown's TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, is one of the most watched in the world with nearly 60 million views. She's a sought-after expert for some of the most powerful companies around the globe. And from Houston, Texas, she joins us for an intimate person-to-person conversation.
Brené, so good to see you. How's my fellow Texan?
Oh, God, doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing very well. You know, I think about person to person. It's the most intimate conversation that someone can have with another.
Yeah.
Do we have the tools, the language to truly connect with one another?
I think there are limits. I think we do have some of them. And obviously we are connecting with other people, but I think we need language that is as expansive as our experiences. And so that's my hope, is to help make a contribution in that area. There are a lot of other great researchers and writers doing this work, but my hope is that we can find tools in language to help us connect both to ourselves and to each other.
Yeah, and this is not just an idea that you had. I mean, you did the research. You interviewed more than 7,000 people. And what did you find about how people express themselves?
Yeah, we asked everyone to write down all the emotions that they could identify in themselves as they were experiencing them. And I guess the mean or the average would be probably 7. And the average was 3. I can identify happy, sad, and mad. And I thought, oh my God, what happens to us and what happens to the connection that we have with ourselves and other people when we have to shove really diverse experiences and emotions into just 3 big buckets? Like, what happens when it's actually not anger or sadness, it's actually disappointment, or it's even more profound than sadness, it's despair or hopelessness or, anguish. And so that really got me thinking. Actually, I'll tell you what happened, Nora. The first thing I thought of when I was reviewing that data with our team was a quote that I came across in undergrad in a philosophy class. It was Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he wrote, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." And I was always so moved by that. And I thought, God, the world of connection that we have within ourselves and between us is so limited if we can't really communicate what we're feeling.
Well, as a philosophy major, I love hearing that, Brené. And I totally, I was, yes. And so I totally agree with you. And I think too, it's interesting in sort of diving in and exploring our own personal relationships with emotions. I mean, and you write about growing up in a very tough, suck it up and get it done and don't talk about my feelings family. I think many people can relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I've been thinking about it a lot. I did a podcast recently on Atlas of the Heart with my sisters, and we were talking about what did we learn about emotion growing up. And I think the conclusion was, and I can't believe after all these years of therapy, this was an aha for me, but I think the only emotion that was allowed was anger, because there was some toughness around it. And so we could be mad, and we could be like, man, I'm so mad at, Ashley. But what was off limits was, man, Ashley really hurt my feelings. And so I think what I still have to work on today from that, because let me make no mistake, a part of emotion is biography, like what we were taught to believe about feeling certain things. So today I have to be really careful about defaulting to anger when I'm feeling different things. And, and you say that resonates for a lot of us. I think we live in a world where it's easier to be angry than it is to be hurt.
Well said. Well said that. And we see that in many aspects of what's going on, certainly the news that we cover every day. And so you wrote this book about Atlas of the Heart, which I think now you're an emotional cartographer Brené, really of map making one of the most difficult things, but really interesting, 87 emotions and experiences that you really go through to help guide us here. So explain this. I mean, how closely is understanding and naming your emotions tied to learning and to growth?
Oh, man. And this is, I'm leaning into the research of a lot of different people here. Mark Brackett, Susan David. The term is emotional granularity. How granular can you get when you're identifying what you're experiencing? And what we know from, a lot of persuasive research is that the more accurately you can name what you're feeling, the better you can regulate it, the better you can move through it. For positive emotions, the more you can replicate it and invite that experience into your life more, let's say wonder and awe and joy. And so just on a big sweep, emotional granularity and the ability to name and label these accurately is just correlated with very positive life outcomes. Mm-hmm. And so this is important. This is not just a linguistics exercise. This is about the quality of our lives.
And distinguishing what those emotions are. And you really have all these great examples in the book. And I think one of the ones that really sticks out in terms of mapping your emotions is working in a restaurant. Everybody knows one of the hardest jobs in the world. I loved reading about you being a waitress and you talking about the difference between being stressed and overwhelmed. Break that down.
Oh, yeah. So I waited tables, bartended for 6 or 7 years, all through undergrad and graduate school. And there were two things, there was one thing you heard every day, every hour. And I thought about, when I thought about this interview, I said, I bet she's going to ask about it just because of her husband. They know this industry, And so it's really typical to say, very common to say, hey, I'm in the weeds. Nora, can you help me get, teas and drinks on to 4? And John, can you help me bring bread to 5 and 6? And I need someone to run desserts to 6, 7 for me or something. That's in the weeds. Like the weeds are up here. I'm moving through them. It's tough, but it's a stress that I can manage it. Mm-hmm. Twice in this 6 years, I walked into the kitchen and I saw it. You saw it maybe 3 or 4 times a year. Someone would walk in and say, I'm blown. In that moment, someone would grab your pad from you. The kitchen managers would figure out what orders needed to go where. And someone would actually run to the hostess stand to check what tables you were responsible for because they didn't even trust you to say that. So I'm blown is overwhelmed. I'm in the weeds is stressed. Stress, it's a lot. I can manage it, but things are happening pretty quick and I'm geared up a little bit. Overwhelmed, and I love this definition from Jon Kabat-Zinn. He says, life is unfolding at a rate that has become unmanageable for both my nervous system and my psyche. Mm-hmm. And so I worked for the Pappas restaurant chain back then. And so the Pappas manager would say, you need 10 or 15 minutes off the floor and out of the kitchen. You can go in the cooler, you can go in the back of the restaurant, you can go anywhere you want, but out of the kitchen, off the floor for 10 to 15 minutes. Well, as it turned out, these were the earliest overwhelm, experts, because in order to reset from overwhelm, you actually have to engage in nothingness. And let me tell you how this has changed my life in the last 3 months since I finished this book. I use the word overwhelmed all the time. Oh God, I'm so overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. Well, language doesn't just communicate emotion. It shapes it. It's as if the bowl you pick to make your cookies in changed the taste of the cookies. The language that we use changes even our neurobiology. So now when I say, how am I feeling? Am I really overwhelmed? Because if you're really overwhelmed, Brené, you got to walk around the parking lot. You got to leave for 10 or 15 minutes. So there's a difference, and how we language it impacts how we feel it.
So you're saying you regulate, essentially, even using that word, because overwhelmed means blown.
Oh,
that means I'm out, see you later, I got to take a time out, whatever it is. So now you may use a different type of word, like I'm stressed or give me a minute or whatever it is. Mm-hmm.
Yes, because language tells our neurobiology, shut down, we're in overwhelm, shut down, we're in overwhelm. It's just like the interesting research on excitement and anxiety. Both present the same in the body, but research shows if you label what you're feeling excitement, the outcome is more positive. If you label that kind of butterfly feeling as anxiety, the outcomes can be more negative.
On that same
Language
note,
is powerful.
envy versus jealousy.
I've been using these wrong my entire life, and I'm still not convinced I'm going to change. Yeah. So if you showed me pictures of your great vacation to, Greece, and I would say, oh my God, Nora, I'm so jealous. Well, what I'm feeling is actually not jealousy. It's envy. Envy is wanting something that someone else has. And I may want you to have it too, but I would like it. Jealousy involves three people. It's the fear of losing something we already have to someone else. And I think the reason we're afraid to use the word envy is because it sounds bad. And there is an issue with malicious envy, which means not only do I want your vacation, I don't think you should have had it.
Got it.
And so, but envy is really two people, jealousy, three people. Jealousy is losing something we already have. And it's not just a romantic partner. It can be time, attention. Siblings can feel jealous with parents, and envy is wanting something someone else has.
Got it. So next time I shouldn't say I'm so jealous that you're going on vacation and just say I'm envious you're going on vacation.
Yes. But didn't it sound weird?
I know, but it's very important. All right. More in just a moment with Brené Brown. We'll be right back. We're back with Brené Brown. So let's talk about comparison. We all do it. And you write in the book, comparison is a creativity killer. Comparing ourselves to others leads to fear, anger, shame, and sadness. But I mean, come on, don't we compare all day long?
Okay, so this has been another, I'm telling you, this book is tough on me, but it's been helpful. I've studied emotions for 2 decades, and recognizing how off I've been about some things has been humbling, to say the least. I am a very comparative person. And so I tell the story in the book about I swim to work out a lot. And if I accidentally end up pushing off at the same time from the wall as someone next to me, I race them every time. And it doesn't matter if it's a 25-year-old triathlete who's 6'5" or an 85-year-old woman. I'm taking you down, to the point, this is tragic to admit, to the point that about, a couple of years ago, I hurt my rotator cuff racing a guy next to me who was like a professional triathlete. I don't know what I was doing. So what I learned when I was writing this book was a couple things. One, to compare is to be human. We compare reflexively. So the intervention point is not, Brené, stop comparing. Where the intervention point is what we do with the data when we compare.
Right.
So if I walk into a room, I'm just reflexively, probably related to survival, going to compare. But what I choose to do with that information or how far I take it is up to me. The other thing I learned is that there's researchers talk about upward comparison and downward comparison. So if upward comparison is racing the 25-year-old triathlete, downward comparison is beating the 85-year-old who actually just walks and kind of moves her arms as she's going down the lane. And both of them can leave us feeling bad. And it's true. I remember the day I raced the older woman. She was in the locker room. She's like, "You okay? You all right, hon?" I was like, wow. Oh God, this is so humiliating.
But I want to drill down on that point because I first thought about or learned about this concept from Lisa D'Amour, who's a psychologist and has written the book Untangled, talks a lot about dealing with teenagers, and I have teenagers. The idea about pathologizing emotion. Sometimes we pathologize stress, we pathologize anxiety or other emotions. But sometimes in many ways, these emotions that we feel can be motivational. In some ways, is comparison good that it can be motivating to you, that we need something to motivate us, give us energy, give us that extra burst of energy, and some other things. Stress or anxiety, you have to label them correctly, but they can also keep them out of harm's way. If we're walking down the street and you hear something or you hear something in your house, that'll choose you to look around. How do you distinguish between pathologizing an emotion and knowing its proper use?
So it's such an important question because it's something that I got to in this book that I've not written about before. And I think it's related to embodiment. It's about, I think we're so disconnected from our bodies that we see our feelings as always as red flags instead of allies. When my body says, Brené, you're really anxious, I used to think, okay, what's wrong with me? Power through, power over it. Something's wrong with me that I'm so anxious. And now I'm like, listen, invite anxiety to sit down for a second and say, what's going on?
Mhm.
And have I taken on too much? Or am I actually just excited? Like, I'm going to get to talk to Norah O'Donnell today. And is this anxiety or is this excitement?
Mm.
So I think emotions can be really helpful data, but we have to be in our bodies. I mean, look, emotion is biology. It's how we feel it. It's biography, what we were taught about it growing up and culturally. It's behavior. How do we show up in it? How am I acting right now in this? And so I think it's really important to be inside of our bodies and feel what we're feeling and get super curious about what that is. And I don't know about you, but not very many of us were taught to get curious about what we were feeling.
Agreed.
And I think, I think it's hard.
Mm-hmm. And on that point, because I think defining, as you point out, having the proper language to define how you're feeling or those emotions is particularly important. And that moment, which is towards the end of the book, why everyone should read the whole book, is the point you make about near enemies in emotions. That sort of was like mind-blowing for us.
It was a concept I came across maybe 15 years ago, and I didn't think about it much. It's a Buddhist concept. It talks about, for every virtue, and you could say it may be emotion, there's kind of a far enemy. So let's take compassion. And the Buddhist scholars say that the far enemy of compassion is cruelty. But one of the dangerous things around compassion is the near enemy, the thing that kind of looks and feels like compassion, but is actually very different, that drives disconnection. And the near enemy of compassion is pity. So if I see someone suffering and I am cruel in response, that's pretty easy to identify, right? But what about this near enemy of pity where I say, oh, you poor thing, bless your heart, that must be hard. And then I walk away feeling maybe good about myself, but I left the person who's suffering feeling even more alone in deeper grief, because the near enemies of emotion don't drive connection, they drive disconnection. And so we have to really pay attention to, I think, the far enemies we get in our culture. It's the near enemies, those things that masquerade, that are dangerous.
And I think for anybody who's been in a relationship, meaning like a loving, or I should say romantic relationship, to be more precise with my words, the near enemy of love is attachment. Wow.
This is not my work. This is the work of a lot of Buddhist scholars that write about how love is liberty and freedom, and attachment is hanging on and desperate need and control. So when I came across it, I've been working on this theory of how we develop meaningful connection with ourselves and others since my dissertation for 22 years. And every book I write, I'm like, this is it. I'm going to crush it. I'm going to nail it. I'm going to put this whole theory in the back of it. In every book, I'm like, I can't get there. And then when I came across near enemy as a concept, I was like, that's what I was missing, because the near enemy of connection, the far enemy of connection, is disconnection or shutting down or acting out. But it's the near enemy of connection that unravels relationships, and that's control. And whether we're talking about a politician and how they seemingly are super connected to a base, but is it real connection? Are they sharing emotion and being vulnerable, or leveraging emotion and leveraging vulnerability? To my role as a parent, when my child says, listen, this happened to me at school today, and the teacher thought I was being disrespectful. Am I connecting in that moment and saying, that sounds really hard, tell me about what happened? Or do I go directly into controlling that moment, saying, that is absolutely unacceptable. I need you to send an email this minute. I need you to apologize.
Wow.
Am I trying to control not just the situation, but my own discomfort, how people perceive me, how people perceive my kids? And so this idea that the near enemy of connection is control, has really enabled me to flesh out this framework on meaningful connection and also change just how I'm showing up with the people in my life.
Yeah. And once again, you just gave me the goosebumps. We'll be right back with more Brené Brown. And we're back with Brené Brown. You know, I think this is probably an important time to just talk about vulnerability, something that many people associate you with, and reminder that vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a strength.
Yeah, I have to stop and say just the irony that the people associate vulnerability with me who, like, I've spent my whole, until I became a researcher studying this, I literally spent my entire life trying to outrun and outsmart vulnerability. And so I think it's funny. Yeah. And let me tell you, I'm not a huge fan of how it feels, but I remember this moment on a military base working with special forces. And the definition of vulnerability from the data is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It's how we feel when we're in uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And I asked these troops, give me an example of courage in your life or the life of someone that you know. Give me one example of courage that did not require vulnerability. And there was just silence, and kind of heads fell into hands. And finally, one young man stood up and said, 3 tours, ma'am. There is no courage without vulnerability. And a week later, I am working with Coach Pete Carroll and the Seahawks. And I asked the same question of the players. Give me an example on the field or off the field of courage that doesn't require vulnerability. Tell me about courage that doesn't require uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And of course, they wanted to huddle first. And they get together and they came back and they said, no, ma'am, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, there's no vulnerability there's no courage without vulnerability. And I think this is the big milestone of adulthood. The vast majority of us were raised to believe that vulnerability is weakness. But at the same exact time, we were told that we had to be brave with our lives. And I think the thing that we spend our adult life reconciling is that we cannot be brave with our lives if we're not willing to show up and be seen when we can't control the outcome. And so it's the big challenge.
And I know that's why you love Ted Lasso as much as I do.
I do. I mean, it's vulnerability every week.
Right? Every week. And the writing is
good.
so fabulous and the characters are so good. But I feel like we're watching everyone be honest and vulnerable with their emotions. It just plays out. And it's amusing and it's heartwarming and it's just inspiring. I mean, I don't have all the words to just, and entertaining too, you know, all of it.
It's the best of us. I think it's the best of us. And we need to see that right now, because I think in vulnerability, to be honest with you, the default is not courage. In vulnerability, the default is self-protection, mean-spiritedness. We see it in the world today. To choose courage in the midst of vulnerability, I think is who we want to be. So I think that's why we love the show so much, because we see people doing it.
Agreed.
Even Roy Kent.
I know. I was Keely for Halloween. I had my I Love Roy Kent sweatshirt on and a little Keely gold necklace. Yes.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, Brené Brown, thank you so much for mapping out our emotions, and congratulations on your new book, Atlas of the Heart. It's sort of the type of book that someone will just keep going back to when you're feeling. Someone say, how do I define this? How am I feeling? It's going to be like the dictionary that sits right on your desk. So thank you, Brené Brown.
Thank you, Nora.
Take care.